My left knee predicts rain better than any weather app. It's been that way since I fell off a loading dock at my first warehouse job, 22 years old, and too proud to file a workers' comp claim. Now every time a storm rolls in, my knee swells up like it's personally offended by the barometric pressure, and I sit there thinking about all the ways I've let people take advantage of that same pride. I was the person who kept the numbers honest. That sounds like a small thing when you say it out loud, but at Crestline Distribution, a mid-sized logistics company out of Columbus, Ohio, moving about $40 million in freight contracts a year, keeping the numbers honest was the difference between the company surviving an audit and the company not surviving at all. I handled accounts receivable, vendor reconciliation, and what my job description diplomatically called financial compliance oversight, which basically meant I was the one who found the mistakes before the mistakes found us. I'd been there 9 years. 9 years of 5 a.m. spreadsheets, of catching billing errors before they compounded into something ugly, of knowing exactly where every dollar came from and exactly where it was supposed to go. I knew which carriers padded their invoices by 3%, hoping nobody would notice. I knew which clients were slow paying and which ones were genuinely struggling. I knew the difference, and I fixed it quietly, and nobody ever said thank you, which was fine. That wasn't why I did it. My direct supervisor was a man I'll call my manager. He'd been with the company 11 years, so just long enough to feel ownership over everything, but not long enough to have actually built anything. He was the kind of person who said, "Circle back," and move the needle in the same sentence without any irony. He forwarded my quarterly reports to the VP with his name in the subject line. I noticed. I didn't say anything. The VP was the owner's nephew. That's the part that matters. The owner had founded Crestline 30 years ago out of a garage in Westerville, built it into something real through genuinely hard work, and then, somewhere around year 25, started handing pieces of it to family. The nephew had an MBA from a school I'd never heard of and a wardrobe that cost more than my annual bonus. He'd been VP of operations for 3 years. In that time, he had reorganized the department structure twice, implemented a software system that nobody could figure out, and taken the entire leadership team to Scottsdale for a strategic alignment retreat that cost the company $62,000. I know that number because I processed the expense reports. My stock options had been promised to me in writing, not company stock, but a profit-sharing arrangement tied to a percentage of annual net revenue, contractually guaranteed after my 8th year of employment. My attorney later told me it was an unusually generous arrangement and also an unusually sloppy one, drafted by whoever the company used before they hired a real corporate counsel. Sloppy in my favor, as it turned out, though I didn't know that yet. The arrangement was set to pay out in March. It was February when things started to go wrong. The company had been in quiet merger talks with a larger freight firm based in Cincinnati for about 8 months. I knew about it because mergers don't happen without financial due diligence, and financial due diligence doesn't happen without the person who keeps the actual books. I had been preparing documentation packages for months, clean versions of our AR aging reports, reconciled vendor ledgers, a full 3-year audit trail. It was meticulous work. It was the kind of work that made a company look trustworthy to an acquiring party. The merger was valued at around $52 million. A week before the due diligence team from Cincinnati was scheduled to arrive, my manager called me into his office and told me I was being let go, effective immediately. He said there had been concerns raised about some discrepancies in my reconciliation reports. He said the word irregularities. He didn't look at me when he said it. I sat very still for a moment. "What irregularities?" I said. He shuffled papers. He said the decision had come from above him. He said HR would walk me through the separation package. He said he was sorry, which was the first lie, and that he hoped I understood, which was the second. I thought about 9 years. I thought about the loading dock and my knee and all the things that let slide because I was too proud or too tired or too certain that doing good work was its own protection. "Is this because of the profit-sharing payout?" I asked. He told me that had nothing to do with it. I picked up my bag. I left my badge on his desk. I walked past the cubicles where people I'd worked with for almost a decade kept their eyes on their screens. I took the elevator down. I sat in my car in the parking garage for about 15 minutes, just breathing. Then I called my sister, who is a paralegal, which is the best thing I've ever done for my professional life. She told me 3 things. 1, do not sign anything. 2, make a copy of my employment contract before I lost access to my email. 3, call her attorney friend Carol, first thing in the morning. I had printed a copy of my employment contract and kept it at home in a manila folder years ago, out of a habit my father had instilled in me. He always said, Keep paper copies of anything you can't afford to lose. I hadn't thought about that folder in years. I thought about it now. Carol was a labor and employment attorney in Dublin, Ohio. She was approximately 60 years old, had silver hair cut very short, and spoke in complete sentences without filler words, which I found immediately reassuring. She reviewed my contract in about 40 minutes and then looked at me over her reading glasses and said the profit-sharing clause was binding and my termination without documented cause likely constituted a breach. She said the irregularities accusation, made verbally to justify my termination, could constitute defamation if they'd said anything similar to other parties. She said we had options. I said I wanted to understand what was happening with the merger first. Because here's the thing about keeping numbers honest for 9 years, you notice when the numbers stop being honest. In the last quarter before my termination, I had flagged 3 vendor invoices that didn't reconcile with our freight contract terms. I'd raised the discrepancy internally, through my manager twice. Nothing happened. I'd flagged them a 3rd time 2 weeks before I was let go. 3 days later, I was out. The invoices totaled about $400,000 in overbilling. Not from our vendors. To them, payments going out to vendors that didn't match contracted rates, which in a legitimate company would mean a billing error. In a company preparing for merger due diligence, it looked like something else. It looked like something had been quietly routing money somewhere it wasn't supposed to go. I hadn't made that accusation to anyone. I just noted the discrepancy, documented it, and asked for clarification. The clarification never came. Instead, I got escorted out of the building with a box of desk plants and the word irregularities following me like a bad smell. The due diligence team arrived on a Tuesday. I know this because a woman I'd worked closely with for 6 years, the accounts payable coordinator who had my cell number and used it, texted me at 8:47 a.m. to tell me the Cincinnati people were in the conference room and that everyone was nervous and that my manager had sent around a memo the previous Friday claiming that recent staffing changes had been made to strengthen financial oversight. She sent me a laughing emoji at the end of that sentence, which I appreciated. I was sitting at Carol's office when she texted me. Carol read the text over my shoulder and said, I asked her what mum meant. She said it meant we had good timing. The due diligence process for a merger of that size is not quick. It's weeks of examination, not days. Financial records, operational reports, legal documentation, HR files, everything. And a good due diligence team, which the Cincinnati firm had hired because $52 million is worth hiring good people, would eventually get to accounts payable reconciliation, which would eventually surface the same discrepancies I'd been trying to flag for 3 months. I didn't send anyone anything. I want to be clear about that. I didn't call the due diligence team. I didn't contact the acquiring firm. I didn't leak documents or make accusations or do anything that could be characterized as interference or retaliation. Carol had been very specific on that point. What I did was respond honestly when the due diligence team's forensic accountant, a quiet woman from Cleveland who tracked me down through LinkedIn, reached out to ask if I'd be willing to answer some questions as a former employee. I said yes. I answered questions honestly. I confirmed what I'd flagged internally and when. I provided the documentation I kept, legitimately, on my personal email, copies of reports I'd sent through official channels, everything above board. The merger fell apart in the 4th week of due diligence. I found out from the same AP coordinator who'd been texting me. She said the Cincinnati team had packed up and left on a Thursday afternoon. Very suddenly, very quietly, and that the VP had shut himself in his office for 3 hours afterward and nobody knew exactly what had happened, but the mood was like a funeral. The total value of the collapsed deal, $52 million. The profit-sharing payout they tried to avoid giving me, $38,000. 42 days after my termination, Carol filed a breach of contract claim with supporting documentation. 8 days after that, we received a settlement offer. I won't give you the exact number, but I'll tell you it was significantly more than $38,000, and it was paid within 30 days, and it came with a non-disparagement clause that I signed willingly because I had no interest in saying another word about any of them. The company did not complete the merger. The VP resigned 6 months later. My former manager was still there, as far as I know, sending other people's work up the chain with his name on it, which is its own kind of sentence. I go to Carol's firm's holiday party now, as a client guest. Last December, I brought a pie from a bakery in Clintonville and stood in her conference room, drinking sparkling water and feeling like someone who had finally, after a very long time, made the right call instead of the quiet one. My niece still predicts rain, probably always will, but I've stopped thinking of that as a liability. I've thought a lot about what I could have done differently, not in the way you replay a mistake, More like the way you study a map after a long trip and trace the roads you actually took versus the ones you almost turned onto. I could have stayed quiet when I first found those invoice discrepancies. A lot of people would have. It's easier to let something slide when speaking up costs you social capital. When your manager is already subtly threatened by you. When the person above him is the owner's nephew, and you're just the woman in accounting who's been there 9 years without a single promotion. I understood the math of that situation clearly. I flagged it anyway. 3 times, through proper channels, on the record. Not because I was brave, because I couldn't make the numbers lie and still call myself someone who kept the numbers honest. Those two things couldn't coexist. Here's what I've come to understand. The choices that feel small in the moment are the ones that define you later. Nobody feels heroic filling out a discrepancy report at 7 in the morning. It's tedious, thankless work. But each of those reports was a small act of integrity, and integrity stacked over 9 years is not a small thing. When the forensic accountant from Cleveland called me, I didn't have to scramble for documentation or soften my recollection. Everything I needed was already there, already dated, already sent to official channels. 9 years of doing the right quiet thing had built something I didn't even know I was building. The nephew, Kevin, made a different kind of choice. He chose expedience over accountability over and over in ways that probably felt minor each time. One invoice here, one rerouted payment there. And when the discrepancies became inconvenient, he chose to make me the problem instead of fixing the problem. That's not unusual. People who operate that way often think they're being strategic. What they're actually doing is borrowing against a debt that always comes due. Not because the universe punishes dishonesty in any mystical sense, but because systems built on false information eventually have to face real information. An audit doesn't care about who got fired or why. It only cares about what the numbers actually say. Carol told me once that the strongest legal positions she ever works with are the ones where her clients simply told the truth consistently and documented it, not where they outmaneuvered anyone. Just told the truth, kept records, didn't panic. That's what I had. A manila folder in my home office with a printed copy of my employment contract and 3 flagged discrepancy reports with timestamps and an honest answer when someone finally asked me the right question. I'm not telling this story to make myself sound noble. I spent 3 weeks after being fired feeling humiliated and second-guessing myself and eating cereal for dinner. It wasn't a movie. It was deeply unpleasant. But there's a kind of clarity that comes when you know, not think, know that you were doing the right thing and someone punished you for it. That clarity is actually useful. It keeps you from capitulating when the pressure comes, and the pressure always comes. What I want people to hear is this. Your most important professional asset is not your title or your salary or who likes you. It's your record of being someone who can be trusted with the truth. That record is built slowly in ordinary moments when nobody is watching and there's no immediate reward. And sometimes, at the exact right moment, it's the only thing standing between you and a very bad outcome for someone who thought they were untouchable. My knee still swells when it rains, but I walk into every room now knowing exactly what I'm made of. That's not nothing, that's actually everything.